Welcome. This podcast is an exploration into being human and what's possible when there's less attention on the noise in our heads. Warning. While listening to this broadcast, you may experience moments of deep peace, sighs of relief, personal insights, or long stretches of dead air. Do not be afraid. This is normal. Under the Noise with Wyn Morgan and Kate Roberts. Welcome to this week's Under the Noise with me, Wyn Morgan, and my co-host Kate Roberts. Hello, Kate. Hi. And today we're joined by Matt Roberts, and Matt is someone I met, we think it's 3 or 4 years ago. I don't think we've really narrowed it down. It's 4 years ago. And I've got to know Matt, I've had the privilege to get to know Matt quite a bit in the last few months, and it's been really lovely to do so, Matt. And I've been wanting you to come on as a guest for this and just finding the right time and everything to make that happen. Now, one question, as I know you listen to the podcast, one question that you might have heard us ask a few guests is the question, for someone who'd never heard of you before, how do you introduce yourself to them?
Wow. I'll start with human, dad, coach, former athlete. Yeah, I could list lots more, lots more labels. What comes to me is somewhat of a reformed character, but I'm not quite sure reformed from what.
That would be intriguing to know. Reformed from what?
Reformed from me in many respects, I think. I almost feel like my life is starting to have a kind of before and after, almost like a slight line in the sand, because as a former international high jumper, so it's something that dominated my life hugely. I trained 5 days a week for 15 years, trained alongside Olympic medalists, so really the highest level. So my life was about me, really about me all the time, and that's quite tiring. I'm not sure I realized it, but yeah. And then I would say 6 weeks before we met, in fact, I became a dad, and I'd retired that year from athletics. So that's the start of my real kind of like turning point, the kind of my reform in the emphasis of my life being from myself onto other people. Yeah, and it's funny, I wrote this recently. I'm just finishing up my website and I didn't realize what was on offer. I think retiring from athletics is a big thing, because it just everything that you do is shaped by that. When you go to sleep, what you eat, when you eat, your whole routine, it's all mapped out. So all of your time, it's quite restrictive in many ways, and it's hard to imagine what's going to be on the other side, or what good, I guess. And yeah, ironically, it's the best thing that, in many ways, that could have happened.
Now, I'm pretty sure it doesn't take becoming a father for that to happen, although clearly there were a few things in your life and that did change dramatically. So, high jumping gone, not being a dad gone, being a dad arriving, being a non-athlete, non-competitive athlete arriving. What else changed?
Well, I think so. Obviously, we met at the Pranskys, and that was the start of a real change in my understanding of three principles. You know, this inside-out understanding. But it probably wasn't until it wasn't until I started coaching that everything changed dramatically and in a relatively very short space of time. Yeah, so I look at the last year and a half, and it's it blows me away, to be honest. Just that I didn't realize how much more was there, how much more was on offer by helping other people. It's been such a huge gift, which I guess kind of just reciprocates. And the more I think the more impact I find that I'm having, that works for me as well.
So we heard a bit about the before and the now. The line that you said, I don't know if you remember, what you saw about life, what insight that you had, a realization that you had that made that shift. Sometimes it's, in my mind and my own experience, sometimes it's, I'm not even sure, but things are different. But I don't know if you're able to reflect back on what was it that you realized that made that change happen from the inside, not athletics or fatherhood related.
Well, I had one sort of my first kind of major insight at the Pranskys, and for me it was even now trying to kind of put words to it is difficult and doesn't necessarily do it justice, but I think for the first time I genuinely saw that we're all the same, which really kind of like uncovered, like, I didn't believe that, or I truly didn't see that to be true. And I think the impact that had on then kind of my relationship to my own mind, my own thinking was quite impactful. But it was only about a year ago I had another insight which that really was really quite powerful in which was around goals and my kind of long habitual nature of imagining futures, and I've described it in the past as being a recovering futureholic. And I was, for many years kind of obsessed with where I was going to get to, the next goal, and it just suddenly dawned on me, after kind of like 15, 20 years of doing this, that it wasn't, all this time I was thinking, oh, this is what ambitious people do. And it just dawned on me that the feeling I was experiencing when imagining this was actually not particularly nice. It was almost like a low-level anxiety. And I mean, and that floored me in the most simple and obvious ways, as if, you know, you realized that you were putting your hand on the hob. And I just dropped it.
Well,
When we were chatting before we started to record, we talked about maybe some things that might be neat to explore. And one of those things was space. And when you were talking about space, you were talking about, I think, in reference to listening to the podcast and the space that's kind of created in that feeling. But also, you talked about how, when you're working with athletes about that space, how does that space show up when you are working with athletes? You talked about it as like, it's similar to that feeling of walking in nature. It's that kind of space.
I'm going to try and pull down multiple things that are flying around my head. You know, one of which is, you know, the inevitable conversation I have with a lot of my clients being athletes is listening to their stories of their experience of performing at their best. And it's so powerful. And I never get tired of hearing it. And it's like hearing the same story, but looked at from multiple different positions, interpreted in a different way. You know, it's what I guess it's so well known, or I'd understand it as flow state. A space, you know, this mind, this space where I guess there is really an absence of our personal mind. And for me, I guess I see that as that's the source of our wisdom, our creativity, you know, however you want to describe it, really. It just, yeah, kind of sort of piggybacking on your sort of previous question, you know, ask about my insights. I trained as an artist, and so I spent 3-4 years sat in a studio, a couple of hours contact time a week. So I had a lot of time, a lot of space to create anything. And I had this realization last year, and it was just so funny, because when it came to creativity, it was so obvious to me that if I didn't have the answer, I didn't need to run after it. I almost create a vessel, and I just wait. Something will come along, and it's like you know, pick it up. Is that any good? No. And as soon as I have the right answer, I know. And when it came to art or creativity, design, something like that, just infinitely reliable. I knew it would always turn up. But when it came to the rest of my life, 15, 20 years or whatever, I didn't think it applied. And I see it clearer than ever now that, yeah, it's just, that was me giving it a name. And it works whether it's sport, art, business, relationships.
There's a question that I would have if I were an athlete and you were coaching me and you were talking to me about flow state. And I'm pretty sure I could give my idea about what that would be. But here's where I might get, I don't know, caught up in the relationship between flow state and results. Real world, physical results. I don't know what you see about that or you've witnessed in real time with your clients about that. I'd love to hear.
Can you expand on the difficulty between the two?
Well, I would find it difficult to because I see the absolute link between the two. But I know people who don't. I know people who would say, well, that sounds great, Wyn, but what about the real world? I gotta get stuff done. I gotta jump higher, run faster, throw further.
And this is the difficulty of sport. This is the compelling nature of our experience. Yeah, it hoodwinked me a million times. I'd be stood on the high jump D and I'd be fine. The bar, an inanimate object, moves up a couple of centimeters, and suddenly I'm nervous, I'm tense, I'm trying too hard. Yeah. Does a good job. But everybody has an exception to the rule. That even if it's just the one moment, and for me, I could probably, in 15 years, I could probably count maybe 15 times. But they're seared into my memory as experiences that were just unlike anything else. And there was no awareness or thought of the result. I'm not sure I was even, it just wasn't, it's not that I wasn't bothered, it wasn't there about, am I going to do well? Am I going to clear this? But the output, blows me away. And I think so. This is what I always kind of come back to, because I think it's so easy as humans, as athletes, to exclude the 1% or the 0.1%. client that I spoke to the other day, and I think had done their best 3 or 4 years ago. So there's so much experience, so much data, which seems to kind of confirm a certain view in that time. But their experience 3 or 4 years ago, they knocked, I think it was 3/4 of a second off, which, you know, when your best is around 50 seconds, that's outrageous. So how is that possible?
How would you answer that?
I don't know. And that's exactly where I want to be, and it's exactly where I want my clients to be. To not know, to see that they do not know. Because that's where we create space. Because any idea of, you know, I'm this, I'm that, I'm capable of this. No matter how educated the guess, it's a guess. So we might as well put that in the pile of bullshit, basically.
Maybe it's the creative storyteller that just starts automatically after experience, and then it needs to tell the story of that, the best, performance, and it just immediately, this creativity shows up and the story begins, and it looks really real. It looks so real. We're so good at it. When I receive the story, sometimes I think, at least for me, it's just noticing the story, how good it is. It's so full of detail and importance and meaning. But noticing it, sometimes just drops me back into the space of not knowing anymore. I was reading a book actually a couple days ago about that flow state for people who exercise or for athletes. And for people that are very used to finding that flow state through sport or through exercise of some kind, It's so easy to think that that's why they're in that space. They think it's about the sport or the exercise. It's very easy, I think, to think that that's why. But the author was talking about how it's the simple act of falling out, like what you said of your personal thought. That flow state's just there. We just think it has to do with the exercise or the sport, the athletics of some kind. But really that state's there, just waiting to show up when we drop out.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty logical though, if you think that extraordinary things are done from that space. So it in itself must be extraordinary. And yet it couldn't be further from the truth. And I guess all we have is spotting when we're not there.
Or noticing, like, for you as an artist, oh, I don't even make up stories in this space. I just know. But over here, man, I got some good ones. And they look really freaking real. But in art, you don't even bother. I love that.
What came into my mind is that we innocently put up invisible false ceilings in that story, whether that's a performance as an athlete in whatever discipline that is, or whether it is as an artist, or it is in any other endeavor of life. They are innocent, invisible, and false. There's exactly that, what you were saying, Matt, is that we don't know. We've got a guess, but the guess is based upon the past. And the past and the future aren't the same. So we could, potentially therefore let go of everything and then be in that flow state an awful lot more. I'm speaking from experience. I'm going back to something that you said as well, so the false attribution of thinking that flow came from the thing. It came from the activity. It came from what I ate yesterday. It came from how much sleep I had. And while those things might matter, but in the moment they really don't. In the moment they don't. But I could make up that they do because it looks like they have more of there's a correlation there, but there's zero causation there. And it doesn't look that way. I just love to notice the freedom that what any one of us is capable of, what I'm capable of, what you're capable of, Kate, what you're capable of, Matt, and what you listening are capable of, we have no idea. And to me, I could see if I was a futureholic, that would help me be a recovering one. to use your words, Matt, which I love that phrase, a recovering futureholic.
Hey, it's a serious condition.
Yeah, he says laughing. Yeah.
I laugh, and yet it was genuinely, it was my own suffering.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's big for people to hear, you know.
Well, I have, I don't know, this understanding, or my previous clients, or maybe my children to thank, because it's the experience of seeing that there isn't anywhere to get to, that actually I perform at my best from that. And that the rest of the time before that, I was never here. I was always, you know, the next thing, next year, next goal, or, you know, whatever it was. And yeah, I mean, that's a surefire way to be a pretty crappy coach and a pretty crappy dad to some young kids.
I love how here can sometimes look like setting athletic records. And sometimes it looks like failed DIY projects.
Didn't fail.
But it's all, I don't know, like it's life and it's perfect.
Mm. It's it's changed my relationship with achieving hugely. And I mean, I think it's probably fair to say that I'm someone who's very driven, you know, very ambitious. And yet I don't have any goals anymore. I mean, even as I was saying that, I was questioning, like, am I still ambitious? Am I still driven? It's like, yeah, I do ridiculous things. Like, yeah, DIY projects. But I guess, coming back to what you said, when it's any goal to me now is just, it's putting a limit on it. And even bigger than that, it's like, well, maybe that's not what I'm meant to be doing, or the direction life's going to go in. I don't know. Maybe I won't be a coach next year. There's part of me that goes like, I genuinely don't know. I mean, I hope so, but the more that I kind of pin down with goals and ideas, that kind of future, it's narrowing my vision. It's reducing the amount of space. It's reducing the amount of possibility for kind of anything. And I guess I'm just saying, well, actually, that's where I'm at my best. That's where I think we're all at our best.
There's a very profound way to wrap up, I think, this episode, Matt. And always a pleasure to listen and talk with you. And while your contact details are going to be shared where people are watching this podcast or listening to it on the various platforms that people will listen in, how would someone get in touch with you if they're not going to be looking at that right now?
My website, psychologicalperformance.com, will be live quite soon, hopefully by the time this is out. And otherwise, I'm on Instagram, psychological.performancecoach.
Good name. Thanks, man.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Under the Noise. If you have any questions or would like for us to chat about any topic, reach out to us. Our details follow the podcast. Thanks again, Matt, for being here. Thanks, Wyn. Thanks for joining us. We'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and review. If you have a topic or question that you'd like us to chat about, email Wyn or Kate at wyn@winning.co.uk and kate@katerobertscoaching.com. Until then, enjoy what's possible under the noise.